sincerely hope that what I'm going to present here today is just the beginning of what I see as a new way of understanding and experiencing our consciousness. I will briefly talk about the circumstances in which my kundalini rising took place, and then go over to the presentation of my insights. Before I begin, I just wanted to mention that at the time of my experience, I did not believe in chakras, did not know what subtle body was, and had never heard the word kundalini. I intuitively believed that truth could be found through the practice of art, but I did not see myself as a spiritual seeker. And the idea of spiritual enlightenment was unclear to me. As you know, I am an artist. I was born in Poland. And for years, I struggled because of my personal situation. And eventually, after many months of depression, on March 10th, 1992, I could not stop suicidal thoughts and urges. I hated myself too much to stay alive. On the way to the store to get razor blades and to end my life, I stopped by the bathroom in hope that taking a shower would soothe my raging emotions. I used a specific exercise that I had been practicing subconsciously in the past to be able to paint in spite of my depressive state. This time, without a canvas in front of me, I found myself in a particular non-emotional state that did not feel good, but it did not feel bad either. It felt like a vacuum. And in front of me was a faint vision of a desolate landscape without a focal point. I called it emptiness. Practicing dwelling in that state allowed for all of those violent urges to eventually subside. I was just lying in the tub, collapsed, focusing on my breath. But after a short while, I realized that my mind still kept on telling me that I should proceed, that I should end my, fix this. My mind still kept on telling me that I needed to end my life. Unable to find a way to fix any past mistakes and find a new reason to live, I finally agreed. My eyes were closed. When I opened my eyes, in front of me, on a white background on the tub, there was a rainbow tube of light dancing peacefully. It seemed to be coming out of me. The longer I looked at it, the more scared I became because it was real and at the same time, supernatural. Terrified, I wanted to jump out of the tub, but I noticed that the rainbow tube was moving with me. It was a part of me and I could not get away from it. After a while of terror and indecision, I made up my mind to conquer my fear and accept whatever would happen next. In the next 20 minutes, in the 20 minutes that followed, I was able to experience my consciousness traveling through what I soon called dimensions of perception. I relived all of my life by miraculously tuning into my thoughts from my earliest childhood decisions observing them continue through my past until each of them, by reaching the present time, got fully resolved and instantly vanished. I watched my ego fall off me like a thick, dried up shell of mud. Joyous and elated, suddenly feeling supported and loved, I received grace and found eternal love in an invisible, loving presence that took a hold of me. I listened to heavenly orchestra and was greeted by ascended masters, not knowing who they were. I received a vision, learned what it was, and found my essence in the matrix of creation. I saw through the illusion of our common reality and illusion of time. In an unimaginable sensation, my soul self-realized as an eternal being. At the end, after asking a question and instantly receiving an answer in an explosion of light, my consciousness united with all that is. Everything became completely clear and my life changed forever. I grasped every step of the process and its final result without it being able to express it in words. Although I was aware that the experience was not describable in its entirety, I hoped that someday I would be able to present some of it with as much clarity as possible, so others can use my insights to their benefit. I could go on for a while how my life changed, but let me just mention for now that the depression and internal conflicts I felt, problems that were dragging me down, all of the emotional charge connected with that just disappeared. Deep sense of happiness within, regardless of the circumstances, has been with me ever since. My physical energy became unbelievably potent. I moved to Reno, Tahoe area in Nevada, became a ski bum, and kept on skiing over 100 days a season. After many years of contemplation, I became a spiritual teacher and published my first book, Transcendence Calling, The Power of Kundalini Rising and Spiritual Enlightenment. Well, let's now not only make sense out of that personal experience, but importantly, show the universal process of Kundalini rising, the structure of subtle body system, and the experience of spiritual enlightenment from a somewhat different perspective. Let's explain this mysterious phenomena using new insights. What I was able to observe and comprehend, and the way I have been sharing this knowledge, is contained in what I call our multidimensional consciousness system. So first of all, in my experience, Kundalini is simply our consciousness. It is all that each of us individually is: body, personality, knowledge, life story. All that you are and know is your Kundalini. Therefore, I call it our individual unit of consciousness. What we see here is the image of subtle body that consists of Kundalini energy and chakras. There is a bit more to the structure of the subtle body, but the basics are sufficient here. Kundalini normally rests at the bottom of the spine, and these colored discs are known as energy vortexes or centers. chakras from Sanskrit. Accordingly to the ancient knowledge, each of them relates to a different part of our bodies and affects different aspects of our lives. In my understanding, in an average individual, the first 3 chakras are developed, although the second and the third one are usually congested. The upper chakras are often closed up or underdeveloped, but some of us can have one or more of the upper chakras open and developed to various degrees. The upper chakras can suddenly open up and close up later. Openings of the upper chakras are often experienced as glimpses, sudden insights, and supernatural spiritual experiences. It is known from the mystical traditions of old India that when kundalini awakens and is able to move all the way up through the chakras, one becomes spiritually enlightened. We also know that there are many instances when kundalini awakens but moves up only a part of the way. That partial movement can cause temporary spiritual experiences, but also serious physical, emotional, and mental problems. Kundalini is consciousness, but it also needs to be understood as spirit. Our spirit creates the subtle body and coils up in between the first and second chakra. Also, accordingly to my understanding, from being formless and without any attributes, once the subtle body is created, our consciousness becomes survival, sexual, and creative. Although in my view, chakras can very well be seen as energy centers, I assign to them a much more important function. Because during my experience, I could observe my consciousness transiting through different worlds, I understand chakras as the personal gates to the ever-present universal dimensions of perception. Each of these dimensions operates on a different principle. Therefore, when it comes to using this knowledge for the purpose of healing, personal growth, and betterment of the mankind, we need to address each dimension separately. During our lifetimes, we experience these eternal dimensions of perception through chakras. By successfully training the lower chakras and cultivating the upper ones, we allow our spirit, our magical consciousness, to easily access all of the dimensions. So the first chakra is the gate to the first dimension, the material one. It is all of the material world, including our bodies. Everything in the material world, like galaxies and atoms, and all substances that can be considered existing and somehow measured. In our conventional understanding, the 3 dimensions are length, width, and depth. But I consider length, width, and depth just sub-dimensions of the material one. The material dimension is enormous and very intricate. When Kundalini awakens, but is not able to move through the first chakra, it can cause pain in the body and other physical problems. When the first chakra is congested, we get sick. The second dimension is emotional. It ranges from the most unhappy to the happiest. There are many emotional states that can be distinguished, but the basic ones could be apathy, grief, fear, anxiety, anger, antagonism, boredom, contentment, cheerfulness, enthusiasm, and happiness. Emotions monitor us constantly and affect our decisions all the time. Unresolved emotions get stored in the second chakra. We need a specific practice to clear our emotions from that chakra. The third dimension is mental. It is the mind and will. A very important dimension because we tend to understand life through its perspective and try to live by its measures. This is our logical, linear thinking propelled by the power of our will. It is a goal-oriented speculation. The mental structures that create our personalities are stored in this chakra and condition our thought process and decision making. The mankind has been dominated by the material, emotional, and mental chakras, and that state of consciousness is known as samsara, the endless cycle of life and death. The dominance of the first three chakras in a human being is what is known as ego. Even though the chakras have a hierarchical order and it is only possible to perceive downward into the lower dimensions from the higher ones, the mind anyway tries to assume total control. It cannot reach the dimensions above because its method of preparation is limited to the linear reasoning, besides being below the upper chakras. Still, as our kundalini travels up, the process of self-inquiry begins with the power of the third chakra and continues all the way through the dimensions. The sub-dimension of the third dimension is time. The upper dimensions exist without time. There are practices that train the third chakra by focusing and surrendering the mind. When Kundalini current is able to pass through the third chakra, all the lingering, unresolved thoughts and mental structures will become cleared, and the ego will be released into transcendence. The fourth dimension is the sphere of eternal love. Something that spiritual teachers like Jesus Christ or Buddha and many others have been talking a lot about. Some of us have this chakra open and understand well the importance of loving and caring about all of life. And most of us can feel the beautiful power of love in personal relationships. If our Kundalini is able to break through the lower chakras and enter the fourth one, we receive the grace and our life experience becomes sacred. The fifth dimension is about exchange of energy. Spiritual healing begins with the fourth chakra, but the energy flow is facilitated by the fifth chakra. In the fifth dimension, we have the magical powers of sound, musical harmonies, rhythm, dance, and performance, psychic powers, connections with otherwise invisible beings like spirits, angels, beings from other galaxies, ascended masters, spirit guides who come to help us, and some evil entities as well. The Akashic Records, a library of every event that ever took place in the past, present, or future, is also to be found in this dimension. Telepathic communication takes place in the fifth dimension as well. Contact with nature is also exchange of energy, and it is healing because of the purity of consciousness present in nature. Everything is consciousness and everything is alive. The sixth dimension is of vision and intuition. This is the dimension of visual arts and visual understanding. It is the third eye. This image of the subtle body comes from the visionary projection in that dimension. In the fifth dimension, we receive the help we are looking for from others. In the sixth one, we engage in our own investigation into the depth of our consciousness. We intuitively decipher mystical visions, comprehend esoteric symbols, concepts, and whole systems of psychic sciences like astrology, numerology, sacred geometry, tarot cards, and any other divination system. Here we meet with archetypes and their mythological meaning. We can explore the power of religions together with all the gods, goddesses, and deities. Visual comprehension of abstract concepts is one of the upper layers of this rich dimension. Eventually, we can see through the illusion of our mundane reality, ego, and time. As you can tell, this realm has many layers. In one of the last layers of the transit through the sixth dimension, our consciousness, which started the journey as an uncoiling kundalini, self-realizes and becomes consciously an immortal soul. The seventh dimension is our higher mind, which I call pure intellect. It is not a goal-oriented linear mind that always looks for gain and speculates in order to come up with the optimal solution. This mind is actively but peacefully observing, witnessing. The third chakra mind works by identifying. The seventh chakra mind works by discerning. If our immortal soul continues the process of self-inquiry and asks the right questions, the right answers will appear and the seventh chakra will burst open. Here, our consciousness unites with all that is in ever-present explosion of light, in absolute awareness and bliss. In that state, it is not anymore possible to think. One becomes a conscious creator engaged in the continuous, inspired act of creating by simply being one with all that is. In the seventh dimension, we find the deepest universal spiritual truths that uniformly apply to everything and everyone. These are the inspiring statements of the spiritual masters that make us experience our higher self. Once our kundalini cleared all of the chakras and united with all that is in a state of spiritual enlightenment, we still need to continue the practice to reach the next step. The final goal is to make the experience stable and permanent and elevate the seat of our consciousness from the sacrum area to the heart area. From the seat in the heart, we can reach lower and upper dimensions at any time and live in communion with human and God equally. As I already mentioned, by training the lower chakras and cultivating the upper ones, we allow our spirit, our magical consciousness, to easily access all of the dimensions. Depending on the person, training the lower chakras may be challenging, but it needs to be done. Developing, cultivating the upper chakras is much more fun. What I teach is something that some of us practice subconsciously, at least to some degree. This is how I was able to understand why my otherwise spontaneous experience took place and why kundalini went all the way through. The truth is that regardless where on the spiritual path we are, no matter how advanced we are, we always need to practice. Initially, I was going to share with you today a second chakra practice called emotions emptiness. However, because this important exercise has 7 steps, I decided to offer a free download of a description of this practice right from my website. It is on my homepage, moniquerebelle.com. And now I wanted to show you a little useful third chakra practice of focusing the mind. I call it dog training. We are not our minds. We have a mind, so it works for us, not against us. If you find yourself in a state of anxiety and lack of focus, imagine your mind being like a crazy dog that is running around and not listening to you. Call it right in front of you and tell it to sit. Watch it sit there in front of you. If it begins to run away again, if your thoughts start drifting, call it back and make it sit. You see, we think that our minds are so huge, that there are so many thoughts that we cannot control it, but we can. We just need to train our mind. There are other important ways of training the mind, and all presenters today, I'm sure, are very good at that. Hardworking scientists, amazing. I know that you guys know that practice, those practices, but I teach them also. You can visit my website, and under services, you will find programs and courses I teach. You can sign up for a free orientation session as well. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this was interesting and helpful.